Let's at the start, first shots fired at Fort Sumter, as you mentioned, and this thing starts brewing and escalating towards a full-on war. What are the different advantages of each side from a military perspective?
Here's one of the great misconceptions about the Civil War among the people who know anything about it, which in the U.S. is a very small percentage. But if they know anything, they know United States victory was inevitable because the United States had 22 million people. The Confederacy had 5.5 million white people and 3.5 million enslaved people. The United States economy was infinitely more powerful than the Confederate economy. The United States had the United States Army. The United States had the United States Navy. Really? Who's going to win this war? The U.S. It's inevitable. Next question. It's not true at all. The U.S. did have those advantages, but the Confederacy had compensating advantages. And one of those advantages was it had a much lower bar to cross for success. It didn't have to invade the United States, didn't have to capture Washington, it didn't have to project its military power into New England. All it had to do was convince a majority of the civilian population of the loyal states that it wasn't worth the cost to make these rebel states come back into the Union. These are two democratic republics at war, and in the end, the civilian sector decides. Somebody my age we have the perfect example, Vietnam. The United States was not defeated militarily in Vietnam, and it didn't matter because when the people said, we're not going to support this war anymore, the war is going to come to an end. The smart people in the Confederacy understood this. They understood it at the time. Lee understood it. Jefferson Davis understood it. You had key people at the time saying there's no way that a nation as large as ours and a population as large as ours has ever been subjected in a war like this. A tie is as good as a win for the Confederacy. And they came very close to that in the summer of 1864. The other thing is the sheer size of the Confederacy is a huge advantage to them. It's huge. With a very poor transportation and communication infrastructure in many ways, and to move a large army deep into the Confederacy is a huge logistical problem. The same thing had happened to the British both during the American Revolution and the War of 1812. They confront the Confederacy is as big as all of Western Europe. That's a problem. It's also a problem that the Confederates are literally fighting to defend their homes. That's almost always a stronger factor than trying to impose your will on somebody else. All of these factors help the Confederacy. The U.S. did have an army. The army had 15,000 men in it in 1860, 15,000. The Navy had fewer than 50 vessels, most of them on overseas stations. There were exactly 3 vessels available to blockade the Confederacy at the beginning of the war. The Confederate coastline is 3,600 miles long. Probably not going to be able to shut down a lot there. So the point is that there are factors that help both sides. To me, the conditions for victory are the most important factor that favors the Confederacy. We just have to make it painful enough to the United States that they're going to say, let them go. We never liked South Carolina anyway. Just let them go. It's not worth it. It's killing too many of our boys. It's costing too much money. And we don't have to worry about slavery in the territories if they're gone, because they'll be gone and our territories will be free of slavery.
So again, the Union is the invading force.
Yes.
Geography comes into play, as you mentioned.
Immediately,
vast
yes.
land. And so in some sense, it's a miracle that the war lasted as long as it did, and then there was as much motivation.
Yes, that they stuck to it.
Because again, victory for the Confederacy was stop the war.
Stop the war. Neither side has an advantage in terms of its leadership. The generals all come. You often used to read frequently the Confederates had better generals, but this is the first war where West Pointers are in charge. They were subalterns in Mexico. The West Point is the United States Military Academy, where the professional officer corps gets its training. It was established under Jefferson. It's the premier engineering school in the United States. And I mean, West Point trained engineers are very, very prominent when they get out of the Army and even when they're in the Army. But by the time of the Civil War, it is West Pointers, who were lieutenants and captains in the war with Mexico, are now going to be the people in charge. Almost every Army commander, almost every Corps commander, which is the next level, are West Point graduates. They took the same classes from the same professors, read the same textbooks, served under either Winfield Scott or Zachary Taylor in Mexico. They bring the same background and body of doctrine and training to the table. It would have been weird if one side or the other had an inherent advantage in leadership. The one place where the U.S. ends up with an advantage is that over the course of the war, it found, in my view, 4 men who could command armies effectively: Grant, Sherman, Philip Henry Sheridan, and George H. Thomas. The Confederacy only ever found one, and that's Lee. And they had more than one army, so that's a problem. If you have more than one army but only one really good army commander, that puts you at a disadvantage.
In what ways would the two sides balance militarily, equal militarily? So the passion, like we mentioned, of the fighting force, the soldiers, the dedication to the fighting.
Both brought the same notions of how to fight a war to the table because the officer corps had been on both sides, had been trained in the same way. Neither side has a real advantage in terms of technology. Both sides use the railroad. Both sides use the telegraph. The United States could have used repeating weapons, but decided not to. The Confederacy didn't have the industrial capacity to produce. So the war is fought by infantrymen, for the most part, carrying muzzle-loading, single-shot muskets, rifle muskets. That's the weapon that inflicts 85 to 90% of the casualties in the Civil War, and they both have exactly the same thing. And they have the same kinds of artillery pieces. The United States Navy is much bigger, but and the Navy is important, but armies really decide the war, and the armies they're organized exactly the same way. They get officers the same way. They're very similar.
So what was the actual fighting like? Like you mentioned, most of it was with muskets. What was the experience of it like?
It's linear formations, shoulder to shoulder kinds of formations that would allow you to maintain unit integrity on a battlefield, which is one reason casualties were high. They line up and fight each other. As the war went on, they resorted more and more. One of the developments was field entrenchments became very common by 1864, and both armies, if they would stop for the night, they would entrench. They'd throw up field works, which gave the defenders a much greater power vis-a-vis the attacking force. They came to decide that you needed about a 3-to-1 advantage in numbers to have a successful attack once field entrenchments were in place. But it's an infantryman's war overwhelmingly, and the infantryman's experience on both sides. The United States side was a little better supplied. Union soldiers ate a little better for the most part. They got regular issues of clothing a little more regularly than the Confederates did. Their uniforms all kind of looked the same. The Confederates would have had a more motley look. But the Confederates didn't lose any battles because they didn't have enough shoes, and they didn't lose any battles because they didn't have enough powder. They never had a problem with that. So it's a war where each side looks like the other side in terms of what the armies actually, if we had wandered through the armies or watched them in battle, they would have looked the same to us.
But it wasn't just about bullets. There's also dysentery and disease.
2 out of every 3 soldiers who died of disease. It depends on what unit you're in. If you're in the Irish Brigade, God love them. Just point us towards something and let us indulge in self-immolation, for God's sake. The Irish Brigade had the reverse. They had 2 men who died from battle wounds for every man who died from disease. But overall, it's 1 man died from battle wounds and 2 died from disease. Overall casualties, killed, wounded, prisoners of war, about 1.5 million casualties in the Civil War.
There's this idea that a big part of the American spirit is the Scots-Irish spirit, the fighting spirit. You think there's some truth to that?
Well, the songs are Irish songs that both sides sing with different words. And I mean, there are a lot of Irish soldiers in the Union Army. But in the entire military-age white population of the loyal states in 1860, just about a third were born somewhere other than the United States.
Yeah.
And they made up about a quarter of all the soldiers. So they're actually underrepresented in the United States Army. Far lower percentage of foreign-born soldiers in the Confederate Army, but they're a little bit overrepresented. So there are lots of foreign-born soldiers in the Army. The largest group are not Irish. They're the second largest group. The largest group are Germans on the U.S. side. The Irish are second. And then you'd go way down the line to get others.
So we talked pretty thoroughly about slavery. Can we talk about immigration? What was the view at the time of immigrants?
Well, I think you know the answer to that. We need to have all that stuff done, but we don't especially like the people doing it. That's basically the... Well, I mean,
America.
the anti-Irish, and a lot of it is bound up with anti-Catholic sentiment, because the Irish are changing the nature of the country. The country is a Protestant, British country, and here come all these Irishmen, and especially in the 40s and 50s, that my Gallaghers came in the late 50s. They are changing the nature, and they take over. Look at them; they don't know their place. They're pretty soon they're taking over cities, and they all cheat when they vote. We know that. You can buy an Irish vote for one drink.
This all sounds familiar, right?
The cartoons were brutal on depicting African-American characters, but they also depicted the Irish as sort of simian characters, often with a jug of whiskey in one hand. I mean, there's profound prejudice. And prejudice against the Germans, whom they called the Dutch. That was what the soldiers would call the German regiments, Dutch regiments. And yeah, there's a lot of ethnic prejudice.
So you mentioned Protestants. So both sides were primarily Protestant Christians.
Overwhelmingly.
At that time, is a very religious country. So the religious sentiment was pretty strong.
Units had chaplains, and there were Catholic priests with Catholic units. Yes, a very big presence.
Was Christianity used to justify?
Of course it was. Both sides used it. Yes. I don't mean to jump on your question, but yes, they did.
I mean, how was it used to justify fighting for a nation?
Yeah, there's a lot of fighting in the Bible. A lot of people killing other people in the Bible. As long as you're doing it for the right reasons, you can, and you could use it different ways. I mean, you can deal with setbacks by saying, well, God tests us. We're being tested. What do you do when God tests you? You don't give up when God tests you. You try harder when God tests you. The very top leaders, this is interesting, the top leaders on the Confederate side, the most famous ones, Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jeb Stuart, they were much more overtly religious than people like Grant, Sherman, Philip Sheridan. I mean, much, much more. Lee is an Episcopalian. Jackson was a Presbyterian, but they talked, I mean, their official reports, their correspondence, it's filled with allusions to religion, much more than Grant's or Sherman's.
What about African Americans in the Army?
African Americans made up, there were about 200,000 black men served in what were called United States Colored Troops Units, USCT.
It was on the Union side.
Yes. Okay, let's just dispense with the hallucination that there were a lot of black men in the Confederate Army. That is such total ridiculous nonsense, utterly unsupported by any evidence that anyone would consider credible. This whole notion of, I mean, it's preposterous. And I'm really managing my language right here. I'm not saying what I really think it is. I've seen estimates of as high as 100,000 black men in the Confederate Army.
Not true.
Really, really, no. Yeah. Were there black men with the Confederate armies? Yes, they're enslaved black men who are doing all kinds of non-military things in the Army to free more white men to shoulder muskets and shoot at Yankees. That's what's going on in the Confederate Army. There are a lot of black men around Union armies before they became soldiers as well. But there are these 200,000 black men joined the military service during the war. They're in the Navy and in the Army. They'd always been in the Navy, the U.S. Navy, and they're not segregated in the Navy in the way that they can be in the Army. They're just in black. You have integrated crews on naval vessels, although they're separated in some ways, but there have always been black sailors in the Navy. The Army, no, that was it's a big thing to put black men in uniform. And for a Confederate, it's bad enough if you announce emancipation, but then you start arming black men. That to Confederates is urging a widespread slave rebellion, basically.
Black regiments on the Union side was enraging the Confederate side.
Yes. And they have white officers overwhelmingly. There are a few black officers, but overwhelmingly the USCT units have white officers leading them.
But symbolically, that is a really powerful
Oh,
thing, right?
it's hard for modern Americans to understand just how jarring that would be to a Confederate. That not only would you have enslaved people no longer enslaved, but you would have the men in uniforms carrying muskets.
So you, as a historian, you've looked at every layer of this, including diaries, and
Mhm.
what what was motivating? What was going through the minds of African Americans who are fighting for the Union side?
I think what you would expect is going. I mean, they would talk about union occasionally, but what that means to them, it's a union without slavery. They have the most of all the people who can have a direct impact on what's going on versus slavery. There's nothing more direct than picking up a musket and firing at the people who are defending a slavery-based society. Doesn't get, and at the same time, you are not only doing that, you are also establishing an unimpeachable claim to citizenship. The whole point of a citizen soldier is that you do your bit for the nation that's helping you, and the nation does these things for you. Well, okay, if I'm picking up and risking my life with a musket in my hand, are you going to tell me I can't vote after I do? I thought that's the whole point of this. One, I'm protecting the right to vote by doing my citizen's role as a soldier. And that was a big debate in Congress.
Mhm.
That really changed the equation of that debate as well. How are you going to treat people after they've served in United States units? Can you
Mhm.
tell them they can't vote? You're not going to give the vote to them?
How many people in the black regiments, but also, folks like Frederick Douglass, saw that black Americans and white Americans should have equal rights?
Well, Douglass saw that, of course, but even within their context, their notion of equal rights is that that doesn't mean that black women are going to vote, just like for white people, it didn't mean white women would vote. But in terms of the context of the time, yes, equal rights should come out of this. Abolishing slavery is the first step of this. It's not the end game. The end game is equal rights for everybody.
Did many people see that?
No, tiny percentage of people saw that. There's a notion that's very common that somehow the white North turned its back on black people after the war, and it should have tried harder during Reconstruction to force the white South to convey full equal rights to black people. The assumption there is simply flawed. Most white people in the North didn't believe that they believe first save the Union, and yes, we'll need to kill slavery as well. Those are the two things on the list. Check, check. We've done those. Full equal rights for black people is not on their list. And they were not willing to do the things that it would have taken to do that, including the white soldiers in uniforms who wanted out of the army after the Confederacy surrendered and said, well, now we need the army to make the white South do the right thing vis-a-vis black people. They would have said, what are you talking about?
Mhm.
I signed on to do this. We did it. Send us home right now.
I think that's one of the lessons you learn from human history across the different places where slavery was abolished is abolishing slavery is not the end of a journey. It's the beginning of a
It's the
journey.
beginning.
And it sometimes quite often takes at least 100 years to go from that to something you would identify as equal rights. And then maybe even beyond that, there's a complicated story about even outside of rights, just how society sees the different
There's a
people.
difference between passing, I mean, the Great Society passed most of you got the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, you got all of this legislation that does a lot of the legal stuff, but it's what's in people's heads
Mhm.
that takes longer and is a more frustrating process.
Remains, as has appeared in human history, potential fuel for the division to rise up again.
Of course, and then people can exploit that. It's waiting to be exploited, and people exploit it.
This is something we do as humans. We like to otherize certain groups.
Good to have an enemy.
And the Civil War for our country is a story of this. It's so understanding the Civil War is in part extremely important for understanding the division, maybe the dormant division that's there.
Yes, and even before the war, there were notions about the other side that for a lot of people in the free states looking south, they said white Southerners are, because they're lazy, they're violent, they don't want to talk out a problem. They'll do what Preston Brooks did to Charles Sumner. They'll beat him over the head with a cane, and they're used to this because they have slavery and they're used to brutalizing black people. That's just how they approach things. And the white South would look north and say they don't care anything about family. They're all just lusting after money. All they care about is material things. They don't have any sense of kinship or family. That's what Yankees are. It doesn't even matter whether any of that is true, of course. There was a sense perceptions are more important than reality with human beings, and the perceptions on the eve of the Civil War were that the other side was different in a lot of ways. They also had profound commonalities. They had a common language, a common religion, a common history. These founding documents, all of that would pull people together, but they found ways to see differences and divided some of the churches. I mean, Protestant churches divided over slavery.
And many of these themes continue to today.